The distress beacon blinked red against the endless black of space, and Roy Bennett knew he should ignore it. Pirates used fake signals to lure ships into ambushes. Smart haulers like him kept moving and minded their own business. But something about this signal felt different. It was weak, fading in and out like whatever was sending it was dying. Roy ran a hand through his graying hair and checked his scanner. No other ships within 3 days' travel. If this was a trap, at least he would see it coming. If it was real, someone needed help badly. His conscience won the argument, it always did. 2 hours later, he found the wreckage tumbling slowly through an asteroid field. The ship was small, built for speed rather than cargo. Burn marks scarred its hull where weapons had torn through the metal. Roy suited up and crossed the void between vessels, his boots magnetic against the dead ship's surface. Inside, the emergency lights cast everything in a sick red glow. 3 bodies floated in the corridor, frozen solid. Roy pushed past them into the cargo hold. His breath caught. Rows of empty cages lined the walls, the kind used for smuggling animals. Most were open and empty, but 3 cryopods sat in the corner, their power indicators blinking desperately. Roy moved closer and wiped frost from the first pod's window. A creature lay inside, small and still. Its scales were translucent like ice, catching the red light and splitting it into rainbows. Long wings were folded tight against its body. Roy had seen pictures of dragons before, the great creatures that lived on distant ice worlds, but never this close. The temperature gauge on the pod read critical. These things were dying even in cryosleep. Roy checked the other 2 pods and found similar readings. He did not know much about dragons, but he knew about emergency medicine. These creatures needed warmth and oxygen, and they needed it now. Getting all 3 pods back to his ship took 4 trips. Roy was sweating inside his suit by the end, but he worked faster when he noticed the pods growing colder. His ship's medical bay was designed for humans, not alien creatures, but life support was life support. He cracked open the first pod and lifted out the small dragon. It was heavier than it looked, dense with muscle under those crystal scales. Roy wrapped it in thermal blankets and set up a heating lamp. The dragon's chest barely moved. He repeated the process with the other 2, arranging them close together under the lamps. For 6 hours, Roy monitored their vital signs, adjusting temperature and oxygen levels by instinct and guesswork. His medical training from his military days had not covered alien biology, but breathing was breathing, and these creatures were suffocating. Around hour 7, the first dragon's eyes opened. They were pale blue, almost white, and they fixed on Roy with startling intelligence. The creature made a sound like wind over ice, soft and questioning. Roy found himself talking to it without thinking. Easy there. You're safe now. Just breathe. The dragon's eyes followed him as he moved to check on its siblings. When the other 2 began stirring, all 3 turned their heads toward Roy in perfect unison. It was eerie and somehow touching at the same time. Roy spent the next week nursing them back to health. They were the size of large dogs with wingspans that barely fit in the medical bay when they stretched. He fed them nutrient paste at first, then moved to frozen meat from his supplies. They ate carefully from his hands, never biting, always watching him with those intelligent eyes. They followed him everywhere. When he went to the bridge to check navigation, all 3 crowded into the small space. When he tried to sleep, they curled up around his bunk. If he left a room, they cried out with sounds that made his chest ache. Roy knew he should keep his distance. These were not pets. Dragons were sentient beings protected by galactic law. He would have to turn them over to authorities at the next station. Getting attached was stupid, but when the smallest one, the one with scales that shimmered more blue than the others, climbed into his lap and tucked its head under his chin, Roy stopped fighting it. He named them despite knowing better. The blue-tinged one became Frost. The largest, with scales like glacial ice, became Glacier. The third, whose scales held hints of gray like winter clouds, became Winter. They responded to their names within days, chirping and clicking when he called them. The database in his ship's computer had limited information about frost dragons. They came from Kalos, a moon covered in eternal ice. They were rare, critically endangered. Poaching carried severe penalties. And there was one line that made Roy's blood run cold. Frost dragons form permanent psychic bonds with those who save them during their vulnerable hatchling phase. Roy read that line 3 times. Permanent. Psychic. Bond. Winter chose that moment to rest her head on his knee, making a sound like a contented purr. Frost and Glacier pressed against his legs from either side. Roy felt something in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the ship's heating systems. "What have I gotten myself into?" he whispered. The dragons just looked at him with those pale, trusting eyes, and Roy knew his life had just changed forever. 3 weeks in deep space with 3 growing dragons taught Roy things no manual could explain, like how Frost refused to eat unless Roy ate first, or how Glacier positioned himself between Roy and any door, as if guarding against invisible threats, or how Winter made a specific chirping sound 30 seconds before Roy's back started aching from too many hours at the controls. They were growing faster than seemed possible. In just 20 days, they had doubled in size. Frost now reached Roy's hip when standing on all fours. Their wings had strengthened enough for short gliding leaps across the cargo bay, and their eyes had grown sharper, more knowing, tracking Roy's movements with an awareness that went beyond animal instinct. Roy felt it too, the connection. Sometimes he knew what they needed before they asked. Sometimes he woke from dreams of flying through ice storms, seeing the world through 3 sets of eyes that were not his own. Sometimes his emotions were not entirely his own either. The loneliness he had carried for years felt lighter, filled with something warm and protective. He tried to research more about dragons during the long transit hours. The database was frustratingly incomplete. Frost dragons were rare, mysterious, and fiercely protective of their secrets. But one article made Roy sit up straight in his chair. It described the bonding process. When Frost dragon hatchlings survived a near-death experience, they imprinted on whoever saved them. The bond was more than emotional. It was psychic, cellular, permanent. The dragons would share their lives with their bonded partner. They would share thoughts, feelings, and according to some sources, even lifespan. No Frost dragon had ever bonded with a non-dragon before. It was supposed to be impossible. Their psychic frequencies were incompatible with other species. Yet here Roy sat, feeling 3 distinct presences in the back of his mind like gentle pressure, warm and reassuring. "This is insane," Roy muttered. All 3 dragons lifted their heads from where they were napping in a pile. Frost tilted her head, and Roy felt a questioning sensation like someone asking what was wrong without using words. "I'm supposed to give you up when we reach the station," he said. "You belong with your own kind." Glacier made a low sound, almost a growl. Winter moved closer and pressed her head against Roy's leg. Frost's eyes were locked on his face, and the presence in his mind grew stronger, not demanding, just there, constant and unshakable. Roy knew the right thing to do. Dragons were sentient beings with their own culture and society. They belonged on Callus with their own people. He was just a cargo hauler who had stumbled into something way beyond his understanding, but the thought of separating from them made his chest tight and his breathing shallow. The dragons felt it. All 3 pressed closer, making soothing sounds. Roy wrapped his arms around them and tried not to think about what came next. The station appeared on his scanners 2 days later. Roy sent his report ahead. Poaching ship destroyed, 3 Frost dragon hatchlings recovered, requesting wildlife authorities meet him at dock. The response came back within an hour. Dock assignment, security protocols, and a message that galactic wildlife officials were already en route. Roy spent those last 2 days trying to prepare the dragons. He showed them pictures of Kalos, of other dragons, of the beautiful ice caverns where they would live. Frost knocked the datapad out of his hand. Glacier positioned himself in front of the airlock and refused to move. Winter simply climbed into Roy's lap and stayed there, her weight now substantial enough to make his legs go numb. Docking procedures went smoothly, but Roy's hands shook as he shut down the engines. A delegation waited in the docking bay, station security, medical personnel, and 3 aliens Roy recognized from his database as Colossi officials. Behind them stood something that made Roy's breath catch. A frost dragon, fully grown, towered over everyone else. She was magnificent, easily 5 times larger than his 3 hatchlings, with scales that seemed to contain entire galaxies of light. Her presence was overwhelming, ancient, and powerful. The dragons huddled behind Roy, making nervous sounds. He felt their fear mixing with his own, creating a feedback loop that made his heart race. The great dragon's eyes fixed on them, then shifted to Roy. He felt her attention like physical weight. An official stepped forward, a tall alien with too many arms and a translator device clipped to his collar. I am Coordinator Brent. You have done a great service recovering these hatchlings. We will take custody of them now. Wait, Roy said. The word came out rougher than intended. There's something you need to know. About the bond. Brent's expression was unreadable. We are aware. The hatchlings were in critical condition when you found them. We understand bonds may have formed. Bonds that cannot be broken, the great dragon said. Her voice resonated through Roy's skull without passing through his ears. She moved closer, each step deliberate and graceful. I am Silverwing, elder of the northern clans. These hatchlings are of my bloodline. Roy felt the three dragons press against him from all sides. Frost was shaking. I didn't know, he said. I just wanted to save them. And save them you did. Silverwing lowered her enormous head until her eyes were level with Roy's. But in doing so, you have created something unprecedented. A bond between human and dragon has never occurred. Many of my kind will not accept this. What happens now? Now we discover if this bond is true. Silverwing's gaze intensified. If it is genuine, it cannot and should not be broken. But if you bonded with them out of ignorance or selfish intent, there may be ways to sever the connection. For their sake, we must know which is true. Roy felt anger flash through him, hot and protective. The three dragons responded to his emotion, spreading their wings and hissing at Silverwing. The great dragon's eyes widened slightly. They defend you as they would defend their own blood, she said softly. This bond runs deeper than I thought. Human, you have been given a gift beyond measure. But gifts carry responsibility. Are you prepared for what comes next? Roy looked at Frost, Glacier, and Winter. Three pairs of pale eyes looked back, trusting and unafraid. He felt their presence in his mind, constant as his own heartbeat, yes. Kalos was beautiful and absolutely freezing. Roy stepped off the transport ship onto ice that had never melted, under a sky filled with auroras that danced in colors he had no names for. Wind cut through his thermal suit like it was paper. Frost, Glacier, and Winter bounded past him, their scales glowing brighter in their homeworld's atmosphere. They looked more alive here, more complete. Silverwing had brought them here after 3 days of medical examinations and bureaucratic arguments on the station. The Galactic Wildlife Authorities wanted to study the bond. Dragon representatives wanted to break it. Through it all, Roy had stood his ground, and more importantly, so had the three hatchlings. They refused to eat when separated from him. They became aggressive when officials tried to take them away. Their distress was so obvious that even the most skeptical observers had to acknowledge something real existed between them. The compromise was this. Roy would come to Kalos for 1 standard year. If the bond proved harmful to the dragons, or if Roy proved unworthy of such a connection, the dragons would attempt to sever it. If the bond held strong and both parties thrived, the dragons would recognize it as legitimate. Roy had quit his hauling job with a single message to his company. He owned nothing that mattered beyond what he could carry. The only hard part was knowing he might lose the 3 creatures that had become his entire world. The dragon settlement was carved into the side of a mountain, all ice tunnels and crystal chambers. Dragons moved through the passages like living art, their scales catching light and throwing it in every direction. They ranged from hatchlings barely larger than Roy's 3 to ancients who could barely fit through the larger tunnels. Many dragons stopped to stare as Silverwing led Roy deeper into the mountain. He felt their attention, their curiosity and skepticism. Some made sounds that his translator could not quite capture, but Roy understood the tone well enough. Disapproval, concern, doubt. Frost pressed against his right side, Glacier against his left. Winter walked ahead, her head high despite being the smallest. Roy felt their determination through the bond, their absolute certainty that they belonged together. Silverwing brought them to a large chamber, where dozens of dragons had gathered. The air was so cold Roy could see ice crystals forming on his breath mask. At the center of the chamber, 3 dragons even larger than Silverwing waited on elevated ice platforms. Their scales were darker, almost gray with age, and their eyes held weight that made Roy want to look away. The matriarchs, Silverwing said quietly. They will judge whether this bond should stand. The central matriarch spoke, her voice like avalanches. Human, you stand before us bonded to 3 of our children. This has never occurred in 10,000 years of our history. Explain yourself. Roy's translator crackled, struggling with her dialect. He cleared his throat. I found them dying. I used what medical knowledge I had to save them. I didn't know about the bond until later. Ignorance is not innocence, another matriarch said. You have tied yourself to creatures you do not understand, from a culture you cannot comprehend. What gives you the right? Nothing, Roy said simply. I don't have any right. I was just trying to help. Help? The third matriarch leaned forward. And what do you expect in return for this help? Fame? Wealth? Dragons are valuable allies. Many would seek to exploit such a bond. Roy felt anger stirring in his chest and immediately felt 3 answering flares through the bond. Easy, he thought toward them. They settled slightly but remained tense. I expect to keep them safe, Roy said. That's all I've ever wanted. If that means living here in the cold, then I'll live here. If it means never seeing another human, fine. If it means the rest of my life belongs to them, that's fine too. The matriarchs were silent for a long moment. Then the central one spoke again. Pretty words. But words are wind. We will test you, human. We will see if your heart matches your tongue. Over the next weeks, Roy faced tests he had not imagined. Not tests of strength or combat, but tests of character. The dragon set scenarios before him, situations with no clear right answer. They watched how he chose, how he reasoned, what he valued. They separated him from the 3 hatchlings for increasing periods. They offered him chances to leave, to return to human space with generous payment for his trouble. They presented him with dragons who needed help, testing whether he would show them the same compassion he had shown Frost, Glacier, and Winter. Roy failed some tests and passed others. He was honest about his limitations. He asked for help when he needed it. He refused to abandon the 3 hatchlings no matter what incentives he was offered, and slowly, grudgingly, some dragons began to respect him. Silverwing became his guide and translator, explaining customs he did not understand, and saving him from social mistakes that would have been disastrous. She told him stories about dragon history while they sat in ice caverns that glowed with bioluminescent algae. She explained that bonds were sacred to dragons, the foundation of their entire society. But bonds are meant to be between dragons, she said one evening. They shape our families, our clans, our world. A bond with a human threatens everything we understand. I know, Roy said. Frost was curled in his lap, now large enough that her tail draped across the floor. Glacier and Winter flanked him. Their wings spread slightly for balance. But I can't change what happened. Neither can they. No, Silverwing agreed. And perhaps that is the point. Bonds are not chosen. They simply are. Fighting them only brings pain. The real test came in the 3rd month. Pirates attacked a nesting site in the southern ranges, attempting to steal eggs. Every dragon capable of flight responded, including Silverwing. The hatchlings were too young to make the journey, but Roy felt their distress through the bond. Dragons were dying while he sat safe in the mountain. He stole an ice sled and followed. His human body was not built for Kalos's cold, but he had learned tricks for surviving here. The journey took 2 days. By the time he arrived, the battle was chaos. Dragons fought in the air and on the ground. Pirates had brought heavy weapons, nets that could tangle wings, sonic emitters that caused dragons pain. Roy saw Silverwing fall, her wing torn by shrapnel. He saw young dragons not much older than his 3 trying to defend their unhatched siblings. Roy did not think. He just acted. He grabbed weapons from fallen pirates, used their own equipment against them. He set charges he barely understood, creating diversions that let injured dragons escape. He dragged Silverwing behind cover and used emergency sealant to patch her wing, and he called to Frost, Glacier, and Winter through the bond, showing them what he saw, asking for help he knew they could not give. But they answered. Their presence in his mind grew stronger, flooding him with strength that was not his own, clarity that came from 3 minds working as one. The battle turned. Pirates retreated. The nesting site was saved, though not without losses. Roy collapsed in the snow, his body shutting down from cold and exhaustion. He felt himself being lifted, carried. He felt Silverwing's gratitude and surprise. He felt the matriarch's attention focusing on him from afar. He woke 3 days later in a healing chamber, wrapped in thermal blankets, with 3 dragons pressed against him on all sides. Roy learned to live in a world of ice and scales. 6 months on Kalos had changed him in ways he was still discovering. His skin had toughened against the cold. His eyes had adjusted to the strange light. His mind had expanded to accommodate. Three other presences that were as much a part of him now as his own thoughts. Frost, Glacier, and Winter had grown from the size of dogs to the size of horses. Their wings could carry them through the air for hours. Their scales had hardened into armor. Their breath could freeze water solid in seconds. They were becoming dragons in truth, not just hatchlings playing at it. But they were also becoming something else, something unique. They thought like dragons but adapted like humans. They honored dragon tradition but questioned it when it made no sense. They were bridge creatures, caught between two worlds, and Roy was caught right there with them. Silverwing had taken their education seriously. She taught them history, protocol, and the complex social structures that governed dragon society. She taught them to hunt in the ice fields, to navigate by the auroras, to sense changes in weather through their scales. Roy attended every lesson, learning alongside them, and Silverwing seemed pleased by his dedication. "You understand something most do not," she told him one day while they watched the three young dragons practice aerial maneuvers. "They are not pets. They are not servants. They are your equals in this bond." "I know," Roy said. "I've never thought otherwise. That is why the bond works." Silverwing's tail swished through the snow. Bonds can only exist between equals. Master and slave cannot bond. The connection would shatter. But you treat them as family, and they return that devotion tenfold. The words proved true in unexpected ways. Roy found himself understanding dragon social cues he should not be able to read. He could tell when a dragon was being respectful versus condescending. He knew which dragons accepted him and which merely tolerated his presence. The three dragons shared their knowledge through the bond, teaching him without words, and he taught them in return. Human concepts like improvisation, adaptability, questioning authority. Dragons had rituals that governed every interaction, but humans made things up as they went along. The combination created something neither species had seen before. The real changes began during flight training. Dragons learned to fly through instinct and practice, but Frost struggled with confidence. She was the smallest of the three, and her wings seemed too delicate for her body. She would launch herself from cliffs and panic halfway down, barely catching herself before hitting the ground. Roy felt every moment of her fear through the bond. It mixed with his own helplessness, creating a feedback loop that made everything worse. Glacier and Winter tried to help, but their natural confidence only made Frost feel more inadequate. So Roy did something no dragon had done before. He found an old paragliding harness in the human supply cache and modified it to fit himself. Then he convinced Silverwing to carry him into the air. "This is foolish," she said, but there was amusement in her voice. "Probably," Roy agreed. "But I need to understand what she's feeling." Flying was terrifying. The wind was stronger than Roy expected, the cold more biting. Heights had never bothered him before, but being hundreds of feet up with only a harness between him and death made his stomach clench. But he stayed up there, forcing himself to relax, to trust the equipment and Silverwing's steady flight. Frost watched from the ground, her presence in the bond shifting from fear to curiosity. Roy showed her through the connection that fear was natural, that everyone felt it, that courage was not the absence of fear but the choice to fly anyway. The next day, Frost tried again. This time Roy climbed with her, riding on Silverwing while Frost launched from the cliff. He kept his fear under control, projecting calm and confidence through the bond. Frost felt it. She steadied her wings and caught the thermal current. For 10 glorious seconds she flew. It was not much, but it was enough. Each day she flew a little longer, a little stronger. Glacier and Winter joined her, and soon all three were racing through the ice canyons while Roy watched from below, feeling their joy as clearly as his own. The turning point came during a storm. Kalos storms were legendary. Winds that could strip flesh from bone, snow that fell so thick it turned day to night. Dragons typically sheltered during such weather, waiting in their ice caverns until the fury passed. But a young dragon got caught outside, separated from his family. His distress calls echoed through the bond network that connected all dragons. Roy felt them too, filtered through his connection with Frost, Glacier, and Winter. The young one was injured, his wing broken, unable to reach shelter. Adult dragons debated rescue, but the storm was too fierce. The risk was too great. They would wait until it passed, then search for the body. Roy could not accept that. He had been a medic once. He had pulled wounded soldiers from battlefields under fire. He knew what it meant to decide someone was not worth saving, and he hated it. "We're going," he told Frost, Glacier, and Winter. They did not hesitate. Silverwing tried to stop them. "You will die in that storm, all of you." "Maybe," Roy said, "but we have to try." What followed was the longest hour of Roy's life. The three dragons flew in formation, using their bond to coordinate in conditions where visibility was zero. Roy rode on Glacier's back, strapped in with climbing gear, using thermal sensors to navigate. The bond connected all four of them, creating a network that let them function as one organism. They found the young dragon half buried in snow, his wing twisted at a wrong angle. Roy slid down and administered first aid with numb fingers while the three dragons formed a windbreak with their bodies and wings. Getting the injured dragon back was harder, requiring all three to carry him in a sling Roy improvised from rope and tarps. They made it back to the caves as Roy's body was shutting down from cold exposure. The young dragon lived. His family wept with gratitude, and the dragons who had watched the rescue stood in stunned silence. "No dragon has ever done such a thing," one of the matriarchs said later. "To risk 3 lives for one, in conditions where success was nearly impossible. This is not our way, but it is human way," Silverwing said. "And through the bond it has become these dragons' way as well. Perhaps that is not a weakness." The matriarch studied Roy, who was recovering in a healing chamber, still shivering despite the warming blankets. Frost, Glacier, and Winter refused to leave his side. The human has proven himself. He has shown courage, compassion, and skill. More importantly, he has shown these qualities bring no dishonor to his bonded dragons. They are stronger together than apart. The matriarch turned to address the gathered dragons. "I declare this bond legitimate. Let any who dispute it challenge me." No one challenged. The room erupted in sounds that Roy's translator rendered as approval, though some voices clearly held reservations. But it did not matter. The bond was recognized. Roy and his 3 dragons were officially family. Frost nuzzled against Roy's shoulder, her scales warm against his skin. Glacier rumbled contentedly. Winter made the chirping sound that meant she was happy. Roy smiled despite his exhaustion. He had found his place in the universe, and it was here, surrounded by ice and dragons and family he had never expected to have. The message arrived encrypted through channels Roy had not used in years. Military-grade encryption, the kind that meant serious trouble. He decoded it in private while Frost, Glacier, and Winter were out hunting with other young dragons. The message was short and brutal. "They know where you are. The Syndicate wants revenge. You took their cargo and exposed their operation. 3 dragon hatchlings are worth millions. You are worth nothing except as an example. Watch your back." It was signed with a code Roy recognized from his military days. Someone from his old unit was warning him. Someone who still had connections to the criminal underworld. Roy deleted the message and tried not to let his fear show, but the bond betrayed him. Frost returned early from the hunt, her presence in his mind sharp with concern. "What's wrong?" She spoke in his mind now, clear as any voice. Roy had learned he could not lie to them through the bond. "Someone from my past is coming. Bad people. They want to hurt us." Frost's mental presence flared with protective anger. She called to her siblings, and within minutes all 3 surrounded Roy in the ice chamber he called home. Glacier, now massive enough to barely fit through the door, growled low in his chest. Winter's scales reflected firelight like weapons ready to strike. "We fight," Glacier said simply. "It's not that simple." Roy tried to explain criminal syndicates, revenge, the kind of people who would kill for profit or pride, but dragons understood honor in combat. The concept of attacking someone purely for money did not translate well. Silverwing arrived before Roy could decide what to do. She had felt the disturbance through the bond network that connected all dragons on Kalos. "Tell me what threatens you," she commanded. Roy explained about the poachers, about the syndicate that ran the illegal dragon trade, about how his rescue of the 3 hatchlings had cost them money and reputation. Silverwing listened with her eyes half closed, processing information with ancient patience. "So they come for revenge and profit both. They want to reclaim their cargo and punish the one who took it. Her tail lashed against the ice floor. They chose poorly. Dragons do not forgive threats to bonded pairs. I don't want to bring war to Kalos, Roy said. This is my problem. I'll leave. Draw them away. No. The word came from all three dragons simultaneously, their voices overlapping in Roy's mind. The force of their rejection nearly knocked him over. The bond means we face threats together, Frost said. Always. Silverwing's laugh was like breaking ice. Besides, the Syndicate made this a dragon problem when they stole hatchlings from nesting grounds. We have been hunting them for years. You have simply given us a target. The attack came 3 days later, because criminals were predictable in their arrogance. They dropped from orbit in stealth ships, 6 vessels designed for quick raids. They landed in the ice field south of the main settlement, probably expecting to sneak in and take what they wanted before anyone noticed. They did not understand that dragons could feel disturbances in the ice from miles away. They did not know that the bond network let dragons communicate instantly across vast distances, and they definitely did not expect the 3 young dragons bonded to their target to have been training for exactly this scenario. Roy had spent his adult life as either a medic or a cargo hauler, but before that he had been a soldier. He knew tactics. He knew ambushes, and he knew how to turn the enemy's expectations against them. The 3 dragons were not experienced warriors, but they were smart and fast and absolutely determined. Combined with Roy's tactical knowledge shared through the bond, they became something the Syndicate could not predict. Frost used her smaller size to slip through narrow ice channels, appearing behind enemy lines. Glacier used his bulk as a battering ram, smashing equipment and creating chaos. Winter, with her precise control and steady nerves, provided cover and coordination, keeping the 3 of them working as a perfect unit. And Roy, riding on Glacier's back, directed them like a conductor leading an orchestra. He pointed out weak points in the enemy formation. He predicted where they would retreat. He used their own tactics against them, herding them into kill zones where adult dragons waited, because Silverwing had not been idle. She had gathered warriors from every clan, veterans of 100 territorial disputes. They descended on the Syndicate forces like an avalanche, overwhelming them with coordinated fury. But the Syndicate leader had come prepared. He had anti-dragon weapons, sonic devices that disrupted their flight, chemical explosives that created fire even ice could not extinguish. Worse, he had hostages, 3 dragon hatchlings, different ones, stolen from another world and kept in cages as insurance. Surrender the human and the bonded trio, or these hatchlings burn, the leader broadcasted on all frequencies. Roy felt Frost's rage through the bond, felt Glacier's desire to tear the leader apart, felt Winter's cold calculation of odds and options. He also felt every adult dragon in range pause, caught between instinct to protect hatchlings and the knowledge that giving in to terrorists only encouraged more terrorism. I'm going, Roy said through the bond to his 3 dragons. Tell Silverwing to hold position. No. Frost's response was immediate. We go together or not at all. This is my fault. Those hatchlings are there because of me. I have to fix it. Then we fix it together, Glacier said. That's what bonds mean. Roy felt their certainty, their absolute refusal to let him face danger alone. He also felt an idea forming, shared between all 4 minds through the bond. It was risky. It was insane. It was the kind of plan only someone who thought like both human and dragon could devise. They approached the Syndicate position under a flag of truce. The leader laughed when he saw them. The infamous Roy Bennett. You look smaller in person, and your dragons look barely trained. Let the hatchlings go, Roy said. Take me instead. Why would I do that? I can take you and keep them. Because I'm worth more. Roy stepped forward. I'm the only human ever bonded to dragons. Imagine what scientists would pay to study me. Imagine what governments would pay to learn how to replicate the bond. I'm a unique commodity. The leader's eyes gleamed with greed. Interesting proposition. While they talked, Roy felt Frost moving through the ice beneath the ground, felt Glacier positioning himself for a charge, felt Winter coordinating with Silverwing and the other adult dragons through the extended bond network, felt everything clicking into place like a machine built for one purpose. There's just one problem with your plan, Roy said. What's that? You assumed dragons and humans think the same way, but we don't. We're better together. The attack came from every direction simultaneously. Frost erupted from below, shattering the ice under the cages and catching the falling hatchlings. Glacier charged through the front, his armored head smashing through defensive barriers. Winter dropped from above with a dozen adult dragons, their combined breath weapon turning the area into a frozen wasteland. And Roy used the distraction to disable the leader's weapon. The combat training from his younger days coming back like muscle memory. The fight was over in 90 seconds. The Syndicate forces were captured or fled. The hatchlings were safe. The leader, frozen to his knees in ice, stared at Roy with hatred. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is," Silverwing said, landing beside them with enough force to crack the ground. "You brought war to dragon territory. You threatened bonded pairs. You stole our children. By dragon law, you have forfeited your life." Roy turned away before Silverwing carried out the sentence. He had seen enough death. Instead, he went to check on Frost, Glacier, and Winter. They were tired but unhurt, their scales barely scratched. "We won," Winter said, her mental voice filled with satisfaction. "We survived," Roy corrected. "There's a difference." But as he stood there, surrounded by his bonded dragons with freed hatchlings playing in the snow and adult dragons celebrating victory, Roy realized something important. He was not just a cargo hauler anymore. He was not just a human living among dragons. He was part of something bigger, something unprecedented. He was family, warrior, and bridge between worlds. And he would protect that with everything he had. The Galactic Council chamber was designed to intimidate. Vast walls of crystal that showed the cosmos beyond. Seats arranged in ascending circles so that representatives looked down on those who addressed them. Lights that made everything feel exposed and small. Roy had faced down pirates and survived on an ice world, but this place made his palms sweat. Frost, Glacier, and Winter walked beside him, now fully grown dragons equal in size to most adults. Their scales caught the chamber's light and threw it back in defiant rainbows. They were beautiful and terrifying, and they radiated absolute confidence through the bond. "Relax," Frost said in his mind. "They're just politicians. Politicians are less dangerous than pirates. Politicians have armies," Roy pointed out. "So do we," Glacier rumbled, and Roy felt the presence of dozens of dragons waiting just outside the chamber. Silverwing had brought representatives from every major clan. The dragons were making a statement. The council speaker, a being that looked like living liquid metal, rose from the central seat. "We have called this session to address the unprecedented situation regarding Roy Bennett, human, and his bonded dragon companions. The question before us is simple: what happens now?" A representative from the Merchant Coalition stood. "The bond is a security threat. Dragons are powerful. Humans are numerous. Combining them creates an unstable power dynamic. We propose separating the bonded pairs and establishing restrictions on future contact." Roy felt anger surge through the bond from all three dragons. He kept his expression neutral, but his hand moved to rest on Frost's shoulder. The gesture was not lost on the observers. "The bond cannot be broken," Silverwing said from her position in the witness circle. "We have tried. We have consulted every expert, every ancient text, every medical facility. What has been forged cannot be undone. To separate them is to kill them slowly. Is that what this council proposes?" Uncomfortable silence filled the chamber. The speaker's form rippled. "No one is proposing death, but the concern is legitimate. More bondings have occurred. 7 more humans have rescued dragon hatchlings. 7 more permanent bonds have formed. Where does this lead?" Roy found his voice. "It leads to cooperation, understanding, maybe even peace between species that never talked before. Or exploitation," the Merchant Coalition representative said. "Humans could deliberately seek out endangered hatchlings, form bonds, and use dragons as weapons or tools." "That's not how bonds work," Roy said, frustration bleeding into his words. "You can't fake the kind of connection we have. You can't manipulate it. The bond only forms when someone saves a hatchling's life with genuine compassion, no ulterior motive. Anyone who tried to exploit it would fail." A different representative stood, this one from a species Roy did not recognize. "We have reviewed the testimony. We have examined the medical data. We have consulted with dragon elders. The evidence suggests Mr. Bennett speaks truth. The bonds cannot be forced or faked. They arise naturally from acts of genuine kindness." "Which brings us to the real issue," the speaker said. "These bonds are spreading. More humans travel to areas where dragons live. Some seek to rescue hatchlings, specifically hoping to form bonds. Even if their motives are pure, the cultural implications are enormous. Silverwing spread her wings, a gesture of importance in dragon culture. The implications are indeed enormous. For the first time in our long history, dragons have found a species that can truly understand us. The bond shares thoughts, emotions, experiences. Humans bonded to dragons become part of our society while remaining themselves. This is not a threat. This is an opportunity. An opportunity for dragons, perhaps, another representative said. But what about humans? What about the other species in this galaxy? How do we know this alliance won't shift the balance of power? Roy laughed, surprising everyone, including himself. You think this is about power? I was a cargo hauler. I lived alone, barely made enough to keep my ship running. I found 3 dying hatchlings and saved them, because it was the right thing to do. Now I have a family. I have a purpose. I have connections I never dreamed possible. That's not power. That's just life being better than it was. Frost stepped forward, her voice resonating through the chamber so all could hear. Before Roy, I was dying. Before Roy, none of us knew what it meant to think beyond our own species. He taught us to question, to improvise, to see perspectives we never imagined. We taught him patience, tradition, and how to survive in worlds that were not made for him. Together, we are more than the sum of our parts. Is that not what civilization should be? The chamber erupted in discussion. Representatives argued, debated, proposed restrictions and safeguards. But Roy noticed something. The tone had shifted. They were no longer talking about whether to allow the bonds, but about how to manage them. The question had changed from if to how. The debate lasted 3 hours. Proposals were made and rejected. Compromises were suggested and refined. Finally, the speaker called for order. We have reached a decision. The bonds between humans and frost dragons will be recognized as legitimate under galactic law. However, the following restrictions apply. Bonds may not be deliberately sought or manufactured. Any human found attempting to exploit dragons for the purpose of forming bonds will face severe penalties. Dragons maintain sovereignty over their worlds and hatchlings. And most importantly, any bonded pair must register with both dragon authorities and galactic records. The speaker paused, its liquid metal form shifting into something almost resembling a smile. Furthermore, we establish the position of interspecies bond ambassador. This individual will serve as liaison between bonded pairs and galactic authorities, ensuring the well-being of all parties. Roy Bennett, you are appointed to this position, effective immediately. Roy blinked. What? You are the first. You have proven the bond's legitimacy. You have shown that different species can work together without one dominating the other. Who better to guide others through this new reality? Silverwing's laughter echoed through the chamber. The human who wanted only to save 3 hatchlings becomes the bridge between worlds. There is poetry in that. The following weeks were chaos. Roy suddenly had assistants, schedules, responsibilities. He met with the 7 other bonded pairs, helped them navigate dragon society, taught them what he had learned through trial and error. Some bonds were strong like his. Others were still developing. Each was unique, reflecting the individuals involved. He also met with dragon clans skeptical of the changes. He listened to their concerns, acknowledged their fears, and tried to find middle ground. It was exhausting work, but the 3 dragons helped shoulder the burden, their presence in his mind constant and reassuring. One evening, after a particularly difficult negotiation, Roy stood on a balcony overlooking Callus's ice fields. Frost, Glacier, and Winter joined him, their scales glowing softly in the aurora light. Do you ever regret it? Winter asked. You could have ignored that distress beacon. You could have had a simple life. Roy thought about the question seriously. He thought about the loneliness of his cargo hauling days, the emptiness of living for nothing but the next paycheck. He thought about the danger, the cold, the challenges of the past year. Then he felt the bond warm and unbreakable, connecting him to 3 beings who understood him completely. He felt the extended network of dragons who had become his friends, his colleagues, his community. He felt the purpose that filled his days now, knowing his work helped forge connections between species. No, he said simply, I don't regret any of it. Frost pressed her head against his shoulder, a gesture she had done since she was small enough to fit in his lap. Good, because we don't either. They stood together as the auroras danced overhead, A human and 3 dragons who had found family in the most unlikely place. More bonded pairs were forming every month. Dragon-human cooperation was becoming normal, rather than exceptional. The galaxy was changing one bond at a time, and it had all started because one cargo hauler heard a distress beacon and decided to answer it. Because he saw 3 dying hatchlings and chose compassion over caution. Because he believed that some connections were worth any risk.
In the distance, Roy saw lights from the new Cultural Exchange Center being built. A place where humans and dragons could meet, learn, and perhaps form bonds of their own.
He saw ships arriving from human colonies, bringing scientists, diplomats, and ordinary people curious about the dragons they had only read about. The future was coming, strange and uncertain and full of possibility, and Roy would face it the same way he had faced everything since that day in the asteroid field, with 3 dragons by his side and a certainty that together they could handle whatever came next. Glacier rumbled contentedly. "What do we do tomorrow?" "Tomorrow," Roy said, smiling. "We teach a class on bond formation to the new arrivals, and probably attend another council meeting, and definitely fit in some flying time." "Busy day," Frost observed. "Busy life," Roy agreed. "But it's our life, and I wouldn't change it for anything." The 3 dragons hummed in unison, a sound of perfect contentment. Through the bond, Roy felt their love, their loyalty, their unshakable certainty that they belonged together. It flowed through him like warmth, filling all the empty places he had carried for so long. He had rescued them, yes, but in doing so they had rescued him right back. And that, Roy thought, was what family really meant.